people who don't focus on, this evidence, it's going to keep them away. So it doesn't raise their consciousness because they look at this and they say it's bullshit. And they ignore the real truth that's involved because they see the bullshit on shit floats. And that's exactly what's happening. All of this false information floats to the top, and it's always the good news. So they have to constantly bombard everyone with it. And the algorithms support that information. So you never really get to the truth. And that's where we're at right now. I think, disclosure is just spinning its wheels and actually losing ground. But overall, yeah, he's absolutely right. It's all part of the alien agenda. And it's an energy harvesting event, but it's to keep us in a state where we're constantly at each other's throats. Nothing gets solved. The machine just completely just keeps moving on and absorbing everyone's wealth, stealing away their freedom, robbing them of their joy.
The added psyop also, just to interject real quick,
Sure.
Nathan, the added psyop of constantly identifying perpetrators, constantly identifying criminals, but nothing is ever done. It's like, here's another one. Well,
Right.
look what they've done. Look what they've done. Look what they've done. Well, start arresting people already, right? It's like, talk's cheap, action speaks louder than words. But again, here we are.
And then you have the rigged system where there are a handful of low-level arrests, which is the low-hanging fruit. The ones that'll catch some headlines, give you the illusion that something's happening. And then as soon as that happens, then it gets amplified in, the social media world because people are going to make videos, they're going to make ad revenue, and the algorithms are going to support them. So it amplifies it. It's like a big echo chamber, and they get everyone's hopes up. But then when it does go to court, nothing ever happens. And the thing with Trump, I'm not to get political here, but it's been a big disappointment for me. And they were really very creative with this because they put up such an opposition where you looked at it and you said, wow, he has to be on the right side. But in fact, he just represents a different faction. And then you have to realize that the entire system is systemically rotten. There's no saving it. The only way through this is to you can't let them get any ground on you, but people are going to give up their rights. They're going to succumb to the AI takeover anyway. All we can do is complain, point the finger, and show the way. Because somebody's got to remember how to do that once all of this collapses. And I think that's where this is headed. We're headed for an attempt at this, and then it's going to completely fall apart, but not after a lot of human suffering. So that's my piece. I'm going to get a drink and sit back and let you guys say something.
Yeah, I'll just tell you guys, as you guys have been talking, I've been trying to get this live stream going. Like, something you guys are going to say is obviously triggering something because they weren't letting me stream at all. I finally got it on YouTube, but I can't get it on Rumble. And it's just like a big, I'm glad we're recording it,
It says it's being live streamed right now.
It is. I got it to go on YouTube. We're on YouTube, but I can't get Rumble to work for some reason. So, I don't know what's going on. It's I use Zoom instead of StreamYard. But no, I really think it's something with the alien agenda too. And I think honestly that people in Minnesota, they seem like they're really hijacked. It seems like, like Beth that comes on my show said that there's the big satanic rituals going on in Minnesota. And if you look at like the behavior of some of these people, people are running around with like bulletproof vests and shit like that. It's like, what kind of world is this? This isn't like, Mogadishu. This is Minnesota. You know what I mean? It's like, what happened to America? It's like, I don't know. Do you feel the same, James? Or what do you think is, yeah.
It's a combination, actually all cut from the same cloth, the long-term indoctrination. If they're really serious about stopping this insurrection, the first thing they would do, or one of the first things they would do, is to shut down all these schools. Okay, especially these colleges and universities, just continually excrete these foaming at the mouth, rabid communists. These chronic malcontents. They can't tell the time on an analog clock. They can't read. They can't do basic arithmetic, but they weaponize their malcontent nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and directed it in a certain direction, and that's where we're at now. There's no empathy. There's no independent thought. There's never, and we see this throughout the Western world. There's absolutely no sympathy or empathy for the victims of crime, especially immigrant crime. And that is right out of the Frankfurt 101, Frankfurt School 101 playbook, that victims of crime are re-victimized by the just us system. They're first victimized by criminals who are enabled by the system. Just look at these perps in America, arrested upwards 50, 60, 70 times plus, but they keep getting let out because they know, the powers that be know, that it's entirely predictable they will go out and they will commit more crime. And it's part and parcel of the archontic agenda, because not only is there a hybridization, breed out the love agenda, but all of that has enabled an ongoing process of hosting. I don't think we've ever seen a time in modern history, recorded history, we know so much has been lost and buried, but to say the last 100 years or so, when so many people have been taken up as host. I would say that there's a tremendous amount of people right now of all ethnicities, some ethnicities and cultures more than others, that are thoroughly taken up by entities, possessed, for lack of a better term. You can just see it in the behavior, the out of control behavior in public, the extreme narcissistic, if it feels good, do it mentality. Someone's struggling on the ground, someone's having convulsions or a heart attack. Instead of giving first aid, or if they knew how, instead of helping, instead of calling 911, they videotape the spectacle. Oh, look, this person's suffering. He's, suffering. He's in agony. I'll put it up on TikTok and see how many likes I get. That's what's happened to the human race. And again, it's like, I'm not fighting for them. I'm not going to become a martyr for these bung munches. And is that who we're going to pass the torch to? Right? That's who's coming after us. So we already see an example of the human race dead ending in many ways. And then when you look at the stories, getting back to the deep black aspect, Dan Burish was working with a J-Rod at a clean biosphere place at S4. And he was basically told by the alien he was working with, well, we used to be humans like you. This is what came out in the briefing papers and what he was told. The J-Rods were pretty much humans like us, but somewhere along the line, from an evolutionary perspective, our paths diverged, right? And maybe, not knowing any better, could our paths have diverged? Because they're saying that we used to be like you and we're from your future. We've come back to try to fix our biology, our genetics, so we're not all mucked up in the future, in our future, right? Who's to say that their divergence and their biological problems didn't start with the rollouts of the treatments here, the last several years on Earth, right? If they came from Earth, right? So, but we're already clearly, in my view, seeing a divergence where so many people are taken up as hosts and have are entity influenced, and we're just seeing it on a mass scale now. Everything is fake as far as all the institutions people buy into. The whole sports world is all just to feed this kind of apathy, listlessness, and disinterest, and get them all to invest their emotions on these rigged sports events, right? None of it makes sense, but this is what happens when they allow these institutions of brainwashing to flourish. So, cycling back to my original point, if they're serious, Nathan made some good points about what they can do if they're really serious about resolving this ICE immigrant issue. If they're really serious about stopping this ongoing insurrection, deeply entrenched insurrection, they've got to shut down these schools, and they've got to go into the elementary schools. Anything to do with any kind of weird Marxist kind of training or indoctrination, critical race theory, whatever, all that has got to go out the window. Those teachers and educators and those school superintendents need to be arrested for insurrection, and those institutions need to be shut down. Get all the records they need, to prove who did what, when, and then just shut them all down. If I had directed energy weapons, I'd evacuate all these schools and burn them down to ashes. Is what I would do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love that. Well, James, I kind of wanted to transition into the kind of the MILAB topic and like what you've been uncovering of as far as like your experiences, and maybe Nate can kind of chime in with his experiences as well. Like you said you kind of wanted to talk about your recent experiences and like off world stuff, like people seeing you in the projects and stuff like that. Did you want to get into that a little bit?
Very quickly, I did have an attack the other night. I was laying on the sofa actually because it was a little warm upstairs and the AC hadn't really kicked in. We're going through a heat wave down here where I'm at. And so I was downstairs on the sofa with the AC cranked up and trying to get to sleep. And I was supernaturally attacked. Something came and shook me basically. And I had to pray it away in Jesus' name, GTFO, right? And it did, it went away. But it was messing with me big time and it wouldn't let me sleep, right? And that was just about, 4 or 5 nights ago. So it just shows that when they think they have you in a vulnerable state, and me, I was just exhausted and wanted to sleep and not have to sweat all night, right? These entities of various stripes saw an opportunity to mess with me, right? But it's not the first time; it's not my first rodeo, so I quickly dispensed of them. It took a little while, don't get me wrong, but eventually I sent them packing. But as far as the MILAB stuff, it's interesting because I watched Tyler and Aaron's documentary last night, and I really liked it. Right?
I did too. I saw it as well, James.
Yeah,
I haven't got them back to them yet on it, but like, they sent me the link to get it, and like I watched it, and what one of the things I found that was really interesting was that they uncovered a lot of those patches that like they're like I guess military patches. Some of them are to Mars. Did you see that part? And
yeah, I saw that part. Yeah,
I was like, man, that's like, if that's real, I mean, like, what the hell is going? It's crazy, right? It's like almost admitting that there's off-world programs going on.
yeah, and I bring it up because once again, just listening to some of these people, it jogs some memories, and I had to do my best to hold down the bile because I was getting increasingly angry for all the things that have been done to us, right? And Nathan brought it up. We have this faux disclosure where Luis Elizondo just went on an interview the other day and said, well, I'm still working for the government. I really can't reveal much. And I can say that they've, aliens are here and they do have recovered craft and don't want to talk too much about it because if they have back engineered this technology, I don't want to give any, information away to our enemies. It's like, why are you even talking? Why have you even come out publicly? Because we already know this. We've known this for decades, right? We don't need this new bevy of whistleblowers. I mean, kudos to some of them for laying on the line and risking a lot to get this information out. But when you hear Elizondo types blowing smoke constantly about how dangerous it is for them and we're threatened and we're getting all these threats, F off.
Yeah.
Those of us that have been in these programs have been worked over, effing tortured, right? To give you just an example, in my personal experience, and what happened to me is certainly not unusual. I'm sure there's many MILABs and project people out there that can relate. They have a way of humbling you in these projects. If you have like one iota of ego, well, look at me, I'm a super soldier, I can do all these cool X-Men type things. The powers that be, if they feel so inclined, and sometimes it could just be part of the routine, they will beat you down and completely humble you. On one occasion, and this was a long experience, I can get into it if you want.
Hell yeah, yeah, for sure, yeah.
I I found myself, and the way that time travel works, the way time manipulation works, the way mind control works. A lot of times, our memories of these events, because of the splitting off and all this other stuff, it's not necessarily in a linear fashion, right? You remember high points and then the scenery changes, but you're very much still in the experience. I was in this conference room. There was a large oak table, and seated around it were a bunch of naval officers in their khaki uniforms. Behind them, behind the table, was the end of the room. There was like a little stage, like a rostrum kind of thing, and there was like a logo banner, something on the wall, right? And I'm laying there in a corner, just like a pile of discarded clothes, drugged out. And I'd be laying there, and I'd lift my head up every once in a while in a drug stupor, and I'd say to myself, "No, I'm still here. It's not a dream." Because I can't wake up from this experience I'm having. And the experience at that time consisted of me laying in a corner, drugged out, while these Navy people are having a conference, right? So every once in a while, I kind of come to consciousness. I'd look up, and they're still having a conference, and I'm just laying there, right? So that's what they thought of me. That's how they saw me, as a disposable resource, if you will, that they have no qualms humiliating and doing these degrading things to. I mean, they could have put me in like a dark room, not giving them any ideas, could have put me in a dark room and just shunted me off into a corner somewhere. Instead, they had to make a point of me laying there all drugged out in a stupor while they continue to have their bloody conference, right? And either before or after that, finally, I was not in that conference room anymore, not drugged out. And that whole drugged out episode lasted for hours. It wasn't like this quick dream where I dreamt I was drugged out and they're having a conference at this table in front of me, and they're just not even paying attention to me because I didn't matter to them. This thing drug on for a long period of time. And finally, I was out of that scenario. And I think what happens also is, in some cases, depending on the background of the individuals, the MILABs, the project people in our example, depending on what their backgrounds are, and listening to a lot of the whistleblowers on Tyler and Aaron's documentary, a lot of them were military. So I'm sure in their case, it was even more extreme than in my case. But I grew up in and around military bases, naval air stations. I worked for the Navy for a while in communications at a major military command, right? So I think what happens sometimes is they can take things from our real background, whether it's places we've visited or spent a lot of time in our childhood, growing up, or our formative teenage years, what have you, and then kind of in a current ongoing mind control uh, scenario, they can get us or put us in places that are reminiscent of the things we experienced in the past. So there's always going to be a fudge factor in my mind, because I'm not one to take everything at face value. But there's always a fudge factor in my mind, whether what I'm really seeing is real or it's based on my experiences and memories from the past, and they've superimposed it upon a current ongoing experience. So anyway, just making that point. Finally, I'm out of that drunken stupor segment of the experience, and um, I'm like in a military vehicle, a Jeep, and we're driving around an installation that could look just like any other naval air station, like the ones I've been on, Naval Air Station Moffett Field, uh, Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego. So I'm being driven around. There's a Navy driver next to me. He's wearing the green BDUs. A lot of times, the enlisted type personnel, or some of them could be officers. Oftentimes, I see them also in green, BDUs, like the Seabees wear, or Navy SEALs would wear, for example, in a when they're not in the field or whatever. And I'm in this vehicle being driven around, and in my mind, I'm saying, "Geez, is this really a naval installation, or is it simulated to look like a naval installation?" I know I'm overthinking it. Sometimes I do that, right? But there was something different about the scenario, because I'm looking up at the sky, and this doesn't look like Earth even. There's something different. It's daylight. There seems to be perpetual haze in the sky. Can't really pick out a light source, right? And but I'm on a full-fledged, on the surface, naval installation with streets, street signs, military vehicles, military-looking buildings, just like I've seen in a number of military bases. Because again, I was a Navy brat growing up, and I've been to some of these naval installations. I've been on 2 aircraft carriers as a visitor, and another ship also on a Tiger cruise. So being driven around this facility, and then later get driven over to a building, and we park outside of it, and there is a debate whether we should go inside or not. I don't know who was making the decisions or who was deciding, whether it was the driver or not, or I was just being taken around for a ride. But my feeling, my gut intuitive feeling about that particular experience, being driven around what looks like to be a naval installation on the surface, was I don't even think that place was on Earth. I think that it was an installation that was set up either on some other world, in this plane of existence, or some other reality or dimension entirely. Because what I've been given to understand is not only do the deep black elements of the military aerospace community have had the means to set up installations, bases on other worlds in our solar system, outside of our solar system, in our plane of existence. They've long since had the ability to go to other dimensions and other realities. And I think that was one of the times that I was in this other reality. What they did was they set up shop in this other reality, and they set it up like any other naval installation surface base we would find on Earth. And I think that was where the fudge factor came in. Where in my mind, I know I'm not having a dream. I know I'm in an experience, but I just couldn't determine exactly where I was, right? Whether it was on somewhere on Earth, but my intuitive feeling, just the way the sky looked and other features. There wasn't a whole lot of activity on the base. I didn't see a whole lot of other people. At one point we went to a runway, like a tarmac, and there was some kind of advanced looking like a craft out on the runway, which normally you wouldn't see on a surface uh, installation because of satellite overhead imagery, what have you. They would tend to hide stuff like that in our reality. So sometimes things like that make me think that I may be off world or in another reality entirely. And there's another place, and maybe some of your viewers can relate to this. And I've talked about it before. There have been many times in my experiences where, and again, this reflects my surface level life. This reflects what I experienced as a youth, what I experienced as an adult working at Commander Naval Air Force's U.S. Pacific Fleet in San Diego, Naval Air Station North Island, where I'd be in these buildings that look like any kind of building you see on a naval installation, at least the ones I'm familiar with. I would see naval personnel, and I'd just be there amongst them, or there'd be conferences and meetings. I'd be sitting in conference meetings and there would be, what I perceived to be high-ranking naval officers, and they would talk to my altar. They would talk to me, and then I would respond, and clearly they'd stop talking and were listening to me and everyone at the table. But the me you're talking to, my consciousness was in the back seat, so to speak, and everything was muted. So it was frustrating where I couldn't hear what I was saying essentially. They had managed to draw out some kind of altar that they were interacting with, but the me that you're talking to was, I was put on mute basically, right? I couldn't even hear what was going on. The audio was out. I was unable to speak, but yet these people paradoxically were responding to me. And then I explained this to somebody who was a high level member of a Luciferian Draco satanic type family who'd undergone a lot of these off world experiences, what have you, just from being a family member in his family. And he's the one that told me that it's possible, more in fact likely, that they were interacting with an altar of yours, right? So I would be in these scenarios. There'd be a lot of naval personnel, either in a conference or just at an installation, just like being in an office. There were times when I would just be in an office, like I've done countless times when I worked for the Navy, and I just sit there at a desk with these naval personnel. And I know it sounds boring. It's like not all the superhero X-Men stuff, but some of my experiences were like that. And one of the places that I was frequently taken to, and again, I got the impression There may be a counterpart on Earth here on the surface somewhere, but I also got the impression, the location I'm going to describe to you in a moment, I got the impression that this was another place that was in an alternate reality or off world somewhere. I'd be in a vehicle, a normal kind of vehicle, seemingly normal from the inside anyway. Who knows what it looked like on the outside? And we'd be going up this. I'd be a passenger and going up this mountain road, forested, going up this mountain, and there would be trees on either side, and foliage and what have you. And eventually work our way up near the summit, and there'd be a big clearing there, and there'd be a big, lack of a better term, a mansion or an estate, right? And we would go inside. There's these big steps and columns, pillars, columns on the uh, front, the front deck there, and walk in. And once again, it was a naval installation inside. There would be what they call a quarter deck. When you hear Daryl James talk about a quarter deck, right? And see what the Navy does is they take these shipboard terms and then they transfer them to a land installation, right? So they use the same terminology. A quarter deck to you and I would be like a lobby, like a front desk, like a foyer, right? So I go into this mansion and there's like a quarter deck there, and then inside there's all these ornate kind of decorations in some places. That's another thing that people need to understand. In some of these underground bases here on Earth, some of them are quite fancy. Some of them are quite ornate. These people, these elites, whatever you want to call them, that live down there, they don't lack for creature comforts. And some of these places are quite plush. I mean, ritzy even. Some of the quarters, if you will, they have set up for some of the rich people down there. They're not just like these ramshackle kind of, Quonset hut type setups. So they're quite plush. And like Bob Lazar said, in some of these underground facilities, they have full scale uh, Olympic sized swimming pools, baseball diamonds, you name it, they've got it down there, right? So anyway, I'm in this big mansion. Once again, there's naval personnel. There's naval personnel, the green BDUs. There's naval officers in khaki uniforms, and it's either in that facility or a similar one, which again, from the outside, looks like a big mansion in a clearing on top of or near the summit of a mountain. And I got the impression, like I said, that it wasn't probably it was not on Earth. In one of those types of settings, there is there's a mind controller, lack of a better term, some kind of psychologist or whatever, either a Chinese American or a Canadian American. My nickname for him is Jackie Chan, but he doesn't look anything like Jackie Chan. That's kind of just my like derogatory slur towards him, keeping in mind that I'm part Chinese, so I'm got nothing against non-communist Chinese, and you're looking for a resemblance. If you ever saw the movie The Last Emperor, right, and it was about the puppet emperor the Japanese installed in Manchuria, which the Japanese called Manchukuo when they took over, and they installed this puppet emperor of theirs. Well, the guy who played that, if you watch the movie, that's kind of what Jackie Chan looked like. And what Jackie Chan would do is he would like to surround himself. He likes to surround himself with beautiful MILAB, presumably MILAB project people, women. Put them in nice dresses, gowns, diamond necklaces, pearl necklaces, and he likes to sit at these big oak tables with a chandelier, and he just likes to sit there with these beautiful mind-controlled women around him and just kind of lord it over them. Okay, that's what Jackie Chan's big shtick is. But he conducts a lot of mind control on some of these women in this mansion and particularly beneath it because there's an underground tunnel system beneath it. So those are the kind of places I've been to. I've been to what seem to be ocean going vessels. And again, here's where the fudge factor comes in, right? Was it a real ocean going vessel or was it simulated to look like that, drawing from my memory, making me think for cover story screen memory purposes that I was on an ocean-going vessel. Some of the ocean-going vessels seem to be like these big cruise liners that were taken up paradoxically, crewed by naval personnel, but they would have functions at these in the ballrooms of these places where you would have high-ranking senior military personnel, naval personnel in dress uniforms, and you would see presumably their wives or perhaps mind-controlled women that were dressed to the nines, dressed with gowns, evening gowns, what have you. They would have these social functions, these balls, or call them what you will, in these ballrooms inside these big, what seemed to be cruise liners. And I'd be on there not just by myself, but like Eve Lorgan would be there with me, Craig Bowers. I've had him on the show. Some of my friends from the high desert of Southern California, my MILAB friends, we would be on these, naval of these what seemed to be cruise ships, and I would go exploring, walking around, looking around, and on the deck and inside wherever I was allowed to go. There were times they would either be singly or with a group of my friends. They would just turn us around and make us go in another direction, right? And we continue exploring. And there were other times where I was certain I was on a big space vessel. And just for historical purposes, just to back up a little bit, excuse me, if one finds the book, very hard to find, and I waited for a long time for the price to go down on this, but it's a book written by the late General Nathan Twining, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, original MJ-12er, right? At the time of Roswell, he was commander of Air Material Command at what later became Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Anyway, he wrote a book called Neither Liberty Nor Security, where he goes into detail. I mean, I waited for the price to go down. It was hundreds of dollars originally. And then, miraculously, I found it for like under $50, so I bought it, right? So in that book, he talks about how the U.S. military, which was the strongest military in the world after World War II, had won a two-front war, right, essentially, and how it was just systematically weakened and demoralized and essentially dismantled in a relatively short period of time, right? Well, he talks about that process, but he was also talking about solutions, things that could be done to rectify the problem, because he and others like him had identified that there were the way they set up the National Security Act, they made a civilian Secretary of Defense that was problematic, because if you get a commie or a Luciferian or whatever as SecDef, and then you have a whole bevy of assistant secretaries, and there are a bunch of commies and Luciferians and traitors too, then you have problems. So he went into detail about how this process plays out. General Curtis LeMay wrote a similar book, America is in Danger, talking about going into more detail about this process. But point being is, while writing that book, General Nathan Twining, on several occasions, makes the point matter-of-factly, we will have a space program. We will have a program where we have the military conducting offensive and defensive operations in space. And he made a point of this several times. Matter-of-factly, didn't go into detail. Now, that book was published in 1966, probably finished writing at 65. And he was an original member of MJ-12 and Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was in a position to know these things. So when people outside of the loop, even within the military establishment, read those comments, they're thinking rockets and what have you, right? They're thinking, shuttles or whatever the case may be. Reading between the lines, Twining was talking about a real space program. And like I said, he mentions it several times. So keep that point in mind that, for all we know, and according to some of the testimony that we heard in Tyler and Aaron's documentary and other testimony we've heard, by then, by 66, 65, the US and other countries, Germany, prior to that, had already developed an off-world capability, right? So getting back to my story, so I find myself in these vessels. Some parts of it are vaguely reminiscent of a surface ocean-going naval vessel, just not as cramped. You would see similar features, but there was much more room in these big space vessels. Anyone who's familiar, even on these supercarriers here on Earth, they're still cramped. You'll see piping and all kinds of things all over the place, bulkheads. You still have this sensation of being hemmed in, of being cramped. You don't get that impression. There are some places, space-wise, in certain parts of the hold, certain parts of these vessels that are not as roomy as others. But then, yeah, and you have things that you would more likely uh, think of in terms of like office spaces or work areas, right? And to me, the work areas always seem to be like too dim for some reason. I talked to David Purcell about that. He said they purposely keep them dim because, some of the crew members are aliens. They don't like it too bright. Okay, that makes sense, right? But there are other parts that are more lit up, that are very large. Like think of a huge hold, a huge cavernous interior where you can just see at a distance at times, the sides of this thing or the ceiling. But I got the impression of a lot of space inside these naval vessels. And on one occasion, I won't go into detail, but I had this horrific experience where I was on board one of these large naval vessels, and of all people, Tom Cruise. And when I looked at him, he was wearing a khaki uniform, a naval khaki uniform. Someone, listening to me would think what would come to mind is, oh, he's thinking of like Maverick, right? Lieutenant Paul Mitchell, right? In the Top Gun movies. No, he didn't appear that way to me. His pallor, his skin tone was very white, right? His hair was longish, a little long, unkempt. To me, he reminded me of what was the name of the vampire in that Interview with a Vampire movie? Lestat. Okay, so to me, from my perspective, it was Lestat, i.e., Tom Cruise, in a naval officer's uniform, a khaki naval officer's uniform, and he had this bitter rage towards me, and he's basically chasing me through this huge ship, right? And he was just displaying this utter determination to get to me and just do something to me, right? Harm me in some way. And so I had to spend a lot of time. And again, this wasn't a dream. In a dream, you can wake up from. A dream, uh, you have these juxtaposed images come at you, super fast sequence. None of them are, seemingly connected, completely unrelated. This was not like that. I'm in a big naval vessel somewhere in space, and this dickhead uh, Tom Cruise character coming after me. I'm thinking Lestat. I'm not thinking Maverick. I'm thinking Lestat, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just desperately trying to get away from this guy. Finally, I came across this in a large part of the interior of the ship. I came across a senior chief or a master chief, petty officer, sitting at a desk. And I said, you got to help me. Someone's coming after me. You got to hide me. And so I guess he took pity on me, and he put me in a way in a small compartment area that had all these cushions and this bed, and he hid me in there. And I stayed in there for hours, it seemed. Now, here on the surface, what we must remember that when they first began integrating the U.S. naval surface vessels, males and females, they quickly found out in the first pilot, vessels when they did this, how quickly the males and females would start to mate, right? In fact, one of the first integrated male-female naval vessels, they called it Love Boat. That was a nickname it had. Forget the name of it. Point of relevance is what they found, what they can do in some of these surface naval vessels is they can create or find an existing out of the way room, which could be hidden, which only a very few people knew about. And they would put mattresses, pillows, cushions in there where people can go in there. It's a love nest, basically, a love nest. So here I am, I'm hiding in this relatively small compartment, and there's cushions or beds, and I'm thinking this must be like a love nest, on board this ship, right? And so I hid in there for a long time until at some point the Master Chief let me out, right? And by then, Tom Cruise was long gone. So, I mean, I can go on in some
Wait,
some
James,
of my experience.
I got a serious question to ask you. I've been wanting to ask you about this because it's come up lately. I know you talked about the ship on the naval base, but I don't know if you remember this. I swear I heard it on your show, The Cosmic Switchboard. But like, I'll come full circle on all this, so just bear with me here. Like, so what's happening is my friend told me about this like 3 months ago. She said a lot of like younger people are having this experience they're calling mall world, where they find that, in their dream or astral realm, they find themselves in this mall space. And I told people, I said, look, I remember James Bartley saying that like MILABs and alien abductees will find themselves in either a gutted mall or some kind of mall scenario. And a lot of times there'll often be like reptilians or grays there. You know what I mean? And I've heard other abductees talk about that too. So I tied the whole mall world thing to the alien abduction / MILAB phenomenon because I thought I heard you talk about it. But like, and the whole thing is fascinating to me, like, because it ties into like wherever this place was that you were, plus like this mall world that people are finding themselves in, and it seems to be a huge phenomena. So it makes me think. I don't know if the controllers or the like the black ops are like creating a holographic universe and putting people into them in an astral space, or like, you know what I mean? Like, and what do you think about that? Like,
Well, that's a good question. I'm not going to mention the names of these people, but there is a family that owns one of the big mall chains, not only in America, but in Australia, and presumably, it wouldn't surprise me, in other parts of the Western world. And they're deeply plugged into intelligence.
wow.
And it's no surprise that you will find underground tunnel systems beneath a lot of these malls. A lot of these malls are not. On top of that, my belief is they tend to be built atop natural vortex areas, as is the case with a lot of these military bases, sacred sites, etc. Right? Somehow the Freemasons in the planning department or whatever, or in these big construction companies, they know where to place these things. And the mall world aspect is interesting because not only are there tunnel systems, and I've heard this from people who are connected to people that work in security, but also involved with, in particular, mall security. Okay, so they would know this, and it's not only U.S. intelligence involved. I'm not going to go into the details, but there are elements of other countries' intelligence services involved with some of the mall security aspects, and increasingly the security is going in a digitalized AI, not surprisingly, right? Panopticon type level that Edward Snowden warned about, right? So, okay, just keep that point in mind. Secondly, the mall world people are describing. I was describing what happened, my experiences in these malls years ago, because I would find myself in what looks like a mall at night. I'm presumably at night. It would be darkened a lot of times. A lot of times people would get to these malls via these underground tram tunnel systems, right? The conveyances in these underground tunnel systems, they vary from the high-speed maglevs, which they talked about in that documentary, and other people have described, but also much more prosaic. They could look like trolleys or light rail or trams in some of these underground facilities. And I've been in them, and some of these trams are just packed to the gills, uh, presumably with other MILABs and other project people, because sometimes I wouldn't see like military personnel. It was just like other people like me in civilian clothes, in night clothes, what have you. And so we get loaded, we'd be on platforms, get onto these trams or these train systems, and then be taken someplace. And sometimes he'd wind up either through that means or some other means. We'd wind up in these mall places, right? And you'd be inside of them. You'd look up. There'd be different floors. You can see the different boutiques. A lot of my experiences took place in what I perceived to be a food court, what looked like a food court to me, right? At night. And there was a place, I think it was called Crossroads Plaza or Crossroads Mall. It was in Salt Lake City. And this has come up in the research over the years, but the night crew, they've since torn down this mall. But the night crew there, cleaning staff and security, they kept having problems with reptilians coming out at night. Because like I said, there was most of these malls have an underground area, right? And not surprisingly, if some of these malls underground tunnel systems intersected or connected or was accessible from deeper underground cavern systems, right? Then you would have this issue with reptilians coming up into the malls at night and spooking and harassing the cleaning staff and the security guards, right? To the point where a lot of people just up and quit. I can't work here anymore. These weird things happen at night. It was all hushed up. We know on the surface, it's come up again in the recent past. I think it's Madigan, a place called Madigan, Washington State. There's a military hospital there where people have seen coming in and out of the buildings and coming in and out of certain elevators, what we would call aliens, like white Draco or reptilians, what have you. And this happens in other places too. Aurora, Colorado was another place where people have seen aliens escorted in and out of buildings, right? So, just keep that point in mind. But one of the researchers who talked about this as well was Katarina Wilson in one of her first books. I think it was either her first book or her second book, but she talked about, and I would agree with this because I experienced this as well. She said some of the craft or installations she's been in, alien craft, alien installations, were huge. And there was a part of her that made her think that she was inside of a large mall, right? A multi-story large mall. But she felt, and I would concur with this because I've experienced something similar. There are times when aliens take you into a craft or a large craft or an installation where, again, based on our own memories, our own lived experience, they can easily make us or plant the seed in our mind to think that you're just dreaming and you're inside of a big mall, right? Because Katarina also talked about, being in an interior of a large craft or an alien installation, and she looked up and it was like a multi-storied, what seemed to be a mall to her, but she got the impression that it wasn't a mall, that it was really an alien installation or a craft of some kind. And incidentally, if one can still find the books, Katarina Wilson's early books, she was one of the first. Well, there was some of us back then that talked about the naval involvement in all this, but she was one of the first to publish her experiences on board space vessels run by the Navy. She had seen high-ranking naval officers seated at a conference table on board a ship, and a short distance away was a gray alien, and she was trying to get their attention. Look, there's an alien over here. And just like in my case, when I was laying on a heap on the floor, they ignored her, right? Because to them, aliens on board of a spaceship, out there in the deep black, it's not a big deal to them, but it was a big deal to Katarina, and she was trying to get their attention about it. She was one of the first to talk about being in underground bases where she saw there was a part of the underground base that was connected to an underground river system. And we hear this a lot in the lore about submarines and what have you. And she said she saw in this underground river system these white cylindrical craft that were U.S. naval vessels, right? We hear so much about Tic Tacs today and what have you, right? Now, I think some of those videos are actual alien craft, but point being is that there have been for some time, if the testimony of Katarina Wilson and others are to be believed, that these cigar-shaped craft, cylindrical craft, have been in the possession, have been utilized by elements of the secret space program for some time now. And she wrote about this, and there was an eyewitness, to some of those craft in underground facilities. So cycling back to the whole mall world thing, it's not surprising that young people today, are being brought into these places that they're calling mall world. There's almost a Minecraft aspect of that, kind of weird. But also, it harkens back to my own experiences where I saw at times, lots of children. I would be being put through my paces. And again, there was a fudge factor. Was I here on Earth going through all this training, or was I somewhere else? Because I was never able to, satisfactorily settle that in my mind. At times, I just knew that I was in a place that was along a coast, sand, uh, woods, uh, having to do a lot of running exercises. And at times during this training, I would see literal Navy trainers, which I perceived to be Navy SEALs, right? For some reason in my head that these guys were special ops. And they were wearing the gray sweatsuits. Remember the old-fashioned, old-school gray long sleeve sweat tops, sweatpants, what they call trackies in Australia, track pants, but they're sweatpants and sweatshirts to us, right? And they would be putting us through our paces, making me run endless amounts of running. But I would see a lot of kids in these experiences being put through their paces, being made to run and exercise and what have you. So, uh, you know, the mall world is an extension of that, because some of those people describing, especially young people describing it, some of them will be abductees, some of them will be MILABs, right? In fact, I would think at this point that anyone who goes to these mall world type settings, they're on the radar of the military, because we know that a lot of the abducting aliens, and there's no telling how many different alien groups they're involved with at this point, on world and off world. But we know that some of the ones that they work with closely are the ones doing the abductions, right? And
Yeah.
we know from Dan Sherman's testimony that the at least they let the military know at least some of the identities of some of the people that are abducting. I wouldn't hazard to guess that they're letting them know about all the people that are abducting, but certainly they're letting them know about a lot. And so there's always going to be this interplay between the person having alien encounters and then the military coming along that are connected to those abducting aliens in some way and re-abducting these people, taking them to malls, taking them to underground bases, taking them off world. So anyway, I just want to get that point out.
Wow. Nate, did you want to comment? I know you've been kind of quiet, like his stuff, but yeah, whatever. Yeah.
I just don't feel so good, so I just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but what I'm listening to, I mean, there's a lot of similarities here to what I've been through. I don't have the memory recall yet that a lot of people have in the community. I have fragmented memories, but I was making some observations while I was listening, to the discussion. And what always gets me is that they can augment your memories, they can augment your mind, and so forth. And it's very difficult to discern if you're experiencing a dream, or if it's a memory recall, or if you just remember something, but maybe it's just your imagination. And what always gets me is when I see and experience something in this, or what I think is a memory recall, that's very startling. It's not something I would expect to see. Something completely out of the norm, something very alien. Also, too, when you get like emotions that come with it, and that can be very intense. So I just wanted to add, throw out a memory that I've had. I got it a couple of years ago. I told you, Rob, we were sitting out behind the hotel Thursday night at the Disclosure Conference. And it's an IBIS related memory. And I had a job in whatever program it was under the IBIS umbrella. I was somebody who would interview people who would come back off of a time mission. And I would be like a counselor. I would also, write down, notes, and we would record everything. And it was like a follow-up analysis with the individual who went through the experience. Because when you can come back from these experiences, it can be very traumatic, very disorienting, it can cause a lot of psychological and emotional issues. And so my job was essentially was, I guess, like an auditor and a therapist combined or something like that. But I remember being in this, it was a neighborhood. It looked like it could have been anywhere. But it had a European feel to it. And it was really, really, everything was clean and very, very neat inside this neighborhood. But the houses didn't at all look like anything you'd find here in the U.S. And I haven't looked around and researched as to where this may be. But I just remember working with this woman, and she had been sent to ancient Mars. And this was when they had a civilization that was in a primitive state. And we were talking humorously about the religions and the things that they had everyone, believing, because I believe Mars was under a type of simulation like we have here, where they had false religions and there was extraterrestrial overlords. And I don't know what point in history this was as far as the Martian civilization, but it's I would say it went back to where when Farsight remote viewed it, they saw an ancient civilization, and it's also been remote viewed by other remote viewers too. But I had that particular memory, and I just remember working with her, just not in a very clear way, but just knowing that I worked with her. But we had this unique conversation. We'd finished our session, and we came out of the office, and the office was a house. It was a house converted to an office in a neighborhood, is what it was. So it was like like when you go through a neighborhood that has a commercial zoning, and you'll see a tax office or maybe a lawyer's office. It'll be a house that's converted over to a type of a formal office, and that's what this was. And we were just having this humorous conversation about all of the crazy stuff that they had everybody, believing, and the imagery, exactly like we have here. So, and that just gives you an idea of how complex this really is. It isn't just space travel. They're experiencing, well, they're experimenting with time. They're manipulating artificial timelines. They're real, but they're being engineered. And it's literally everywhere under everybody's noses. And that's the part of this that's just so frustrating, because they can hide it in plain sight from everybody. And so I just wanted to add that, but I really don't have much else to say. I was just taking it all in and listening. I'm sort of a guest to this podcast today because I wasn't supposed to be here.
Yeah,
So,
no, well, let me ask you, Nate, have you ever found yourself in like one of these mall type scenarios? Because it's starting to become a thing. Like that more people are
yeah,
realizing. Like I think I've even had experiences at them. Like I just can't put it together for whatever reason.
yeah, but I do have I have a question for James. When you're in these naval ships, was there a technology where you could go like low down in the ship and you could look through the hull and actually see the marine life, like a viewing screen where the metal became transparent?
Sounds familiar, but I don't have a specific memory about that.
'Cause
I know that.
I had a
Just
very lucid dream of that, and I was on a
oh,
cruise
okay.
ship, and I don't know I don't know really the context. Seemed like more of a vacation vessel, but the longer I was there, the weirder it got, to where there were unusual, marine life that you could look through the wall of the ship, and it did have that military base kind of feel to it. So, I don't know if it has any validity at all to this discussion, but it just had me thinking when you were talking about that, because you did say that these underground facilities can be ornate, and I remember memories that I have when it was an alter version of me as a child, and for whatever reason they felt the need to let me wander around the base. I wasn't treated like the other children. I was in a special type of class where I had more freedom, but it was heavily monitored. They wanted to see how I interacted with things. I was allowed to walk the halls of the base, even in the restricted areas where the ETs were, but I wasn't allowed to go into any of the rooms. And no one made eye contact with me as well. It was as if they were all told, he's part of the experiment. Leave him be. Don't talk to him. Don't look at him. Act like he's just not there. And I'd walk around hoping to catch a glimpse of ETs is what I would do. And I just remember I couldn't leave. The halls are really big. Some of them are actually pretty small, and they were ornate. So some of them are really, really large, like you're in an airplane hangar type of a hallway size. And they had that feel, and there was the metal struts up in the ceiling. and and you could see where they would run the air ducting and everything. And it was just large and almost like open like an airport, like a military base. And then you had these other long hallways that would that had a much smaller size. The ceilings were lower, and they'd have these natural rock wall reliefs to where you would see the natural rock, and then you'd have the engineered wall, whatever material it was. And it was a lot of earth tones in these areas. The other ones are more sterile looking, like white and just regular colors that you'd find in a base. But these other ones are more of like an earthy tone, more, really pleasing to the eye. The light wasn't as strong in these areas. The areas that had a lot of the lighting were the large open areas where there was a lot of activity. And I've just got fragmented memories in various scenarios. One was me walking around with a certain level of freedom. Another one was me being wheeled through a hallway covered in something. It could have been a sheet or a plastic membrane of some kind, but I had a triangle cut so I could look. And I just remember regaining my consciousness and just looking up, and I was being wheeled through by these two people with white lab coats, and there was people all around me. I couldn't see them because my vantage point was through this little triangular cut in this material, which was just enough, for me to be able to see the ceiling and actually get some air. But yeah, that's pretty much the extent that I have of it. But it's just I hope to remember more of what's happened to me. But it all sounds very familiar, James. I mean, I think we're all really remembering the same things at various levels. And
You talked about a big hangar. I've been in big hangars before. I mean, very, very tall hangars and quite spacious on the inside, and hangars that I felt were oddly enough. In some of these really large hangars, I still got the impression we were underground.
yeah,
So it seems as if they had built what seemed to be from the interior a huge hangar, but it was underground. And some of the parts within this hangar were what we would call like a stock room or a warehouse. There were aisles, and just think of a normal big kind of warehouse, and you'd have the um, I forget what you call them, but the aisles would be made up of metal, um, construction and shelving and what have you. But a lot of times the items on these shelves would be covered in tarps, right? So you couldn't really see what was beneath them. There would be like rows of these, and like I said, there would be very uh, the interior of these places would be very, very large. That's one of the things that I got from some of these experiences with this scale. And if you go onto my show, thecosmicswitchboard.com, you'll find an interview I had with a guy called himself Matt R, if memory serves. And Matt R, he was being trained by law enforcement, uh, elements of the National Guard. I'm sure there was an intelligence overlay with the law enforcement and the National Guard and reptilians. And this was in the run up, the lead up to Hurricane Katrina. We know how that was all geoengineered. We know how they blew out the locks in the Ninth Ward to flood the place.
that was
But
some Louis Farrakhan of all sources. He said he saw that. He
what's
observed.
that?
Louis Farrakhan went down to look at the aftermath of Katrina, and he said that he saw visual evidence of explosives that what do they call it, the locks or whatever that let that
Yeah.
flood in. It was all engineered to
Oh,
enhance.
absolutely engineered. And in the weeks leading up to that, this guy Matt was taken to a mall in the middle of the night where he was trained in crowd control, how to deal with civil unrest, rioters, what have you.
Be a police
And
officer.
well, he was connected to law enforcement.
Yeah, he was in the
And
Kerry Cassidy show. I saw the interview there.
oh, I didn't know he was on the show. I had him on my show too, and
He was on.
we
He
were
was
in
on Project
comms for a
Camelot.
while. What's that?
I think he was on Project Camelot when Kerry went solo. And this guy had a shaved head. I remember that. He was in law enforcement. I remember the story, and I remember listening to it at the time. My knowledge base of all this was rather limited. And I just remember thinking, that just sounds crazy. And a lot of people in the comments were having trouble, believing it too, because these things are so far-fetched and out of the norm. They're not what you would think is going on. I mean, and that's really because the fact that, disclosure's been so limited with these whistleblowers. You only hear the surface level disclosure. It's just R&D and stuff. So that's really
like what they're trying to convey, that they have not gone operational. Well, they've been operational. They've been operational for a long time, right? So they're still putting out that meme where they're still trying to figure it out. They're still trying to make things work and how to understand that. No, they're far beyond that. They've been operational for decades now. And hearkening back to the documentary, I just saw it last night. Some of the comments made by some of the witnesses. Oh, I can't remember her name. I'd love to. You probably know her, Robert. I'd love to get her on the show if you can introduce us. But she was the former Army gal, and they took her to on the outside what looked like just like an old house or something, right? And then in the inside, it was all high tech. They had retina scans and what have you. And it was the entranceway into a tunnel, a very high tech tunnel system. We've heard the same stories in a place right on the Edwards Air Force Base reservation or directly adjacent to it. There's a place on the surface known as Haystack Butte. And in Haystack Butte, there is an old abandoned, I think it's a dairy, right? A dairy farm. Inside the dairy farm, high security, high tech tunnel system, elevators lead to take you down to a deep, deep underground base there beneath Edwards, where there's aliens and a lot of high tech weird science stuff is going on. So, when she said that, I go, well, that's just like the stories that I heard a long time ago about, and also similar stories coming out of Dulce, where one of my colleagues I work with closely, when I used to do the reptilian stakeouts in the high desert of Southern California, once in a while I'd bring this old submariner, 1950s submarine crewman, who was also an ordained minister, very interesting, who was a former government remote viewer. In fact, in the early 1970s, they'd taken him out to Area 51 because they were developing this kind of, if you saw the Clint Eastwood movie Firefox, where Clint Eastwood had to steal this plane where, you put on a certain helmet and then you become one with the plane and can fly it just by thought. Well, this guy told me, this remote viewer, and he was already well into his 60s or 70s when I met him, all these old school Navy tats all over him, all over his arms. And he said that he was taken to Area 51 because they were test flying these airplanes, these fast jets that had a similar connection from the pilot to the plane itself, right? The flight controls, what have you, and they kept crashing and killing the pilots. Well, they sent him in there to figure out what was going on. He talked to a number of the pilots in the program, and he went back to the control and said, well, here's what I think is going on. You're forgetting that these are normal people put in extraordinarily stressful situations. Flying fast jets under normal circumstances is a highly hazardous occupation anyway, and now you're expecting them to be able to manipulate these flight controls with the power of their mind. They have a saying in the airlines and also in military aviation of not getting behind the aircraft. And what that means is there's a certain number of steps, procedures you have to do to keep ahead of the plane, to keep from falling behind the aircraft. In other words, losing control, right? This is the problem a lot of these DEI minority type pilots are having. They're falling behind the aircraft and they're crashing and having these other mishaps, right? Well, these pilots that had these helmets on were all stressed out, and also my friend pointed out to his control, some of these guys are having marriage problems. They're having these other issues, family problems, financial problems. So they're bringing all that into the cockpit with them, and then you expect them to fly these things, and it's no surprise that they're pancaking into the desert floor, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, the point of relevance was
your issue, and then you probably lose control of the craft.
Oh, absolutely, if you're preoccupied. And the point of relevance, the reason I brought him up was because he had gone to Dulce, New Mexico on a private investigation, and he remotely viewed some of the places, and he'd seen with his own eyes how some of the houses, the old ramshackle, seemingly deserted houses, the roofs would flip open and then craft would fly out of them, flying saucers. We've seen and heard similar things where uh, in the Antelope Valley, not the Antelope Valley, the San Gabriel Mountains, Tehachapi Mountains, the Tejon Ranch, where beneath this mountain called the Anthill is a Northrop Grumman alien human aerospace facility. And it's one of those places where the sides of the mountain will either slide open or it'll flip, part of it will flip open, and it's got foliage, grass, trees on top even.
I've seen
And
something like that, James.
yeah, it'll flip open and craft will fly in and out of it. So when the witness was talking about this, she was taken to this on the outside, kind of looking like a ramshackle type house, but inside it's this high tech entranceway into the underworld. Let's say that's absolutely the case. I've heard that years ago, and also uh, Tony was talking about being there in Yokern. And what people don't realize is in Yokern is near China Lake. In Yokern, even before World War II, I don't know what they call it now, but it was called NOTS for a long time, Naval Ordnance Testing Station. They actually fabricated the the bomb casing for the Fat Man plutonium device. That was one of the places at Knott's there in Yokern where they, based on trials, dropping these dummy, inert Fat Man type bombs. They would have high explosives in it, but they wouldn't have a plutonium core. And then they would practice bombing, dropping these things in the Salton Sea near Nyland, California, where the Navy SEALs do a lot of their land training at. They would drop these out there in the desert, and then based on the performance, and then they would go back to the drawing board. What can we do to improve this? Well, knots at Naval Ordnance Testing Station there in Yokern was one of the places, and it's connected to the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, which is not too
Wow.
far away. That whole area, Ridgecrest in Yokern, very, very deep black military operations, reptilians, off-world. At China Lake at one time, they had a human-looking alien race from the Scorpius constellation that was working in a place that the Navy set aside for them called the borax mine. For whatever reason, certain aliens have a need for boron, borax, what have you. And so they have this underground facility there called the borax mine. And this human-looking alien race from the constellation Scorpius had a base there as well, right? So point being is that Tony was taken to these places in Yokern, and even before World War II, that was already a weird science, testing ground. So that stuck out to me, when he said that, and also it's like Tyler's story, right? He seemed to have been taken to places uh, adjacent to or near Buckley Air National Guard Base there in Colorado, which is a very, very spooky, weird science type place anyway. But he seems to have been taken to an alternate reality version of the place that wasn't as built up as it is today. The point being, and the reason I'm bringing it up is there was a lot of correspondences when I was watching that documentary just last night that you know uh, the sincerity of the witnesses comes across. You can tell the trauma that they've endured comes across to the viewer. The sincerity of these people, right? I just have nothing but respect for them, and I'm really grateful that Tyler and Aaron had come out with this at this time, because we desperately need to take the momentum away from this faux disclosure, which is a limited hangout, CIA controlled, and get it back on track to where it needs to be, because we're the ones at the spear point. We're the ones that have been thrown to the wolves utilizing these ops from childhood. In my case, certainly in your case too, Nathan. As children, we were drag kicking and screaming into these things. No compensation, no remuneration, just a lifetime of having to deal with all these issues that come out of this, and then we still got to live in the workaday world, in the day-to-day world with all these abnormies all around us, all these muggles, right? I don't mean to sound like judgmental or elitist about it, but increasingly, and I hate to say this, I try not to be, I'm a lover of humanity, but there are times when you really feel disengaged at times. At least I do
Oh,
from the
I
rest
do
of the
too.
surface population. Because I've come to this realization a long time ago. I'm a spy on this world. I'm a spy on this world. I have to blend in. I have to fit in. But it's like our understanding and the understanding the Muggles that are so far apart by this point, right? Another quick point I want to make, and kudos to Candace Owens for bringing stuff up in surface level discussions about stuff we're familiar with. She talked about these gateway programs, which I was familiar with too, where they would find, all these really talented kids scholastically, intellectually, and psychically, and then put them through their paces in these magnet type schools, these special schools. And also, I bet you anything, also that is related to those mysterious hearing vans that we used to have to go to when we were kids, right?
Yeah,
Where
they don't
you
have that
they they
anymore.
they,
It's true.
they bring the hearing
People,
mobiles. You
right?
remember those, the hearing mobiles?
They were
We talked
very
about it
concerned
before.
about us the way we, our hearing. It was unusual. They don't care about us
Oh
at
no, it
all.
was unusual. No, they were looking for implants because they would tweak these knobs. With my case, they say if you hear a tone, open your hand, right? And so I'd open my hand. They go, and they'd be puzzled. Are you sure about that? Yes, I'm sure. I can hear it.
Well, as
They
you know,
tweak the knobs.
those
What's that?
tones, those tones that we get in our ears from these implants sound exactly like the tones that they played in our ears when we did the
Exactly. And
test.
that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to identify who among us are implanted or at least able to perceive these tones. And
And you know
then
something?
later,
I
like
remember
first they
going to
show
that.
up.
Hold on a second, James. I remember going to that test, and I remember not being able to discern whether I was hearing the tone I was normally hearing, or I was hearing their tone. And I'm like, I think I heard it, you know. So, but I was already in the situation, so it wasn't. They already knew, not necessarily them, but the powers that be already had me.
I think that the hearing mobiles were an effort to find those who have not been identified yet, right? Maybe
Right.
the aliens hadn't told them the whole story and didn't tell them about all the people, the kids that were taken.
It's
So
the second
first around the
runner-up,
second grade,
ones that
they
could
make
be
it a big.
used on.
What's that?
It's the ones. It's like the second, runner-ups. I mean, they've had me for more than one lifetime because I have a memory that they allowed me to remember that was implanted, it was re-implanted back, but it was edited. They had like these little rectangles over their eyes and stuff, and like shading over the faces. But I was doing a soul transference in this body, so they had me already. But yeah, that's like a fishing operation for the second runner-ups. Those that would be useful someplace, but they need to gather them up and figure out who they are and what they can do, and then how to utilize them later.
I've known gals. In fact, I met this one gal at the International UFO Congress circa 93, 92, something like that. And we were waiting in line for the buffet or something. I can't remember what we were doing, but it had something to do with food. And we got into a discussion, and she mentioned that her little friends, i.e., the Greys, they had come for her. They'd abducted her the night before in her hotel room at the Showboat, which was a long since demolished hotel in Las Vegas where the conference was. She was abducted at the conference. We've heard this many times before. Anyway, so she's talking to me, and then we get into a deep discussion, and she says that not only was she abducted by the military, when she told me this, my ears perked up, right? But when they abducted her, they were interrogating her not about her experiences and events in this life, they were interrogating her about her previous incarnation where she had a connection with the Germans, right? So here's the military come along, abducting this gal. And no, we're not interested in your current alien experiences. Tell us about what happened in your last life. When you were a German, presumably working with these aliens, right? So they have a way of knowing about not only our current incarnations, but some details about our past incarnations, which, in my view, either through looking glass technology or liaising with some of these aliens who would
I think it
probably have
is.
a better idea.
We live in a type of an AI transdimensional, it's a prison system here on this planet. So we're cataloged and we're tagged. Everyone here has an implant of some, it's an etheric implant. You're tagged like wildlife and you're put into the population. So the AI system automatically knows who's coming in. You're not going to be able to incarnate unless you go through the system in most cases, I would think. So they already know. And so it's an interplay between the military and the ET presence who runs the prison. It's like, okay, we're going to let you use some, and you take this and you do that. So yeah, they already have all of this, and it's just like at the end of life when for those who decide to concede and go to the life review or get reincarnated and mind wipe, they know everything about you, all the way down to the very last emotional sense of whatever happened. So yeah, they've got it all. We're all in some mass, huge AI construct of a system that maintains and monitors everything.
I agree. That's what it seems like. Yeah. And they make it like a dualistic nature. So they mix in like experiences benevolent with bad, malevolent. So people aren't really questioning their reality that, they can have something bad happen to them, but they're like, oh, that's just life. That's just the way life is. They don't realize that the undertone of this reality is really a lot more corrupt than like what people want to even realize. I mean, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I mean, that's just kind of what I've been coming to think of lately. That's what it seems like. I don't know,
Well, if you haven't noticed, I'm sure you guys haven't. There are no good news stations around. It's always,
Yeah.
Look, this Nipah virus in India. 2 confirmed cases in a population of almost 1 billion, right?
It's
and
insane.
Trying to terrify.
And you know what they're doing now, Jane? It's weird. Like I love X because you can find some really good stuff on X, but like every time I go on X, it seems like they're trying to like rage bait me. You know what I mean? Like they're showing me like, Muslims running crazy through the streets, or, people,
Yes.
some crazy, lesbian protesting in Minnesota, something
Yes.
like stuff that they know will trigger me. You know what I mean? And I don't have
Yes.
anything against that, I'm just saying like, it's like they do it,
fine
they
line.
weaponize it, that
they weaponize our sense of injustice, our frustration, and our rage about all this, right? It's all done deliberately, and also, with the influx of all these AI generated videos too, right? Where you have to do a double take. What am I looking at? Is this even real, right? And why is this even showing up on my news feed or my
yeah,
Twitter feed?
yeah. It really
divide and conquer us. And if you're on a leftist feed, you're getting constant ICE videos that are upsetting you. You're hearing all sorts. I mean, it's designed and it's such a brilliant system. If they turned it around and used it for positive social engineering, which I still don't agree with, but it's either that or get rid of it altogether. But if they did that, you'd see a rapid change in society. They're literally flipping the switch and making it like this.
Absolutely. Because they want people to feel a certain kind of way. They're trying to trigger emotion and rage, and I absolutely believe that.
First they censored to see how the public would push back and what people would do in response to that. Then and it isn't something that they realized, they already knew this. It was like the second stage was, okay, let's put them in echo chambers. That way we can steer the left versus the right, and we can make them come together and fight it out. And it's like AI puppetry. They can just get everybody, to dance on the strings.
Yeah.
And people need to realize this when they get so angry and they lash out over, political arguments, that both sides or all sides are being manipulated, and they get so angry at other people that they want to attack ICE officers. The ICE officers get to the point where they're just like, screw it, I'll shoot the public. And it escalates to this point. That's what they want. And they're doing this on purpose. And people need to stand down and stop this nonsense and realize what's being done to everyone.
Yeah, I'm doing a show tonight, Nate, with Indigo Angel and this little girl, Beth. I think Beth Noyes. Well, Beth lives in Minnesota, and she's going to show some evidence of some satanic stuff that's going on in Minnesota. So she sent me links, so they're going to go over that tonight. But like, I truly believe it's something like very satanic going on there, and I believe a lot of people are hijacked.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Also, too,
Ciszek.
earlier, I just want to mention one thing from earlier, and this goes into social engineering. What we're going through is cyclic. This has been done before, and because we're on this simulated, well, it's a real experience, but we're under an augmented reality, and it's various levels of it. This is cyclic. They're restructuring society to bring in an AI takeover from there. Who knows what? But what they do is they break down the continuity between people. They take the love out. They make people hate one another. They divide them, and they put everyone in a survival mode. And that's why they're destroying the economy. People who are doing well financially are not going to be always on the edge. They're not going to be prone to this level of violence. For every person you see out there on either side of this, this ice thing, every one of those people is being affected by the same exact stimuli. They're suffering in the same exact ways, and they're on edge, and that's what fosters the violence. You just need a trigger from that point, because people see, they see the government as being more, becoming more tyrannical, yet they'll support the tyranny when they're told to. And the same thing with the right. It's the same exact situation on all sides. And so this is all engineered, and people need to realize that. And what we really need in the disclosure community, along with the information that comes out, is we need to teach discernment, and people need to be educated about psychological operations, why they're done, how they're done, and what we can do in response to it. How do we combat the propaganda and the illusions? And that needs to be done. And it hasn't been done. It's being done a little bit by some of us. But, we need to really focus on that. And that's what I plan on doing as soon as I get myself stable. I'm real close to that now. But it needs to be on everybody's agenda and on everybody's mind. You need to educate one another. And because if we can't clear up our own mess with these illusions in our echo chamber, we're not fit to take it to the public yet, and we're not going to succeed, because we can't even get to the truth. We can't discern what it is on our own as a community. How are we going to go out in the world and actually wake the rest of them up, because they're under mass illusion as well? So that's what the focus needs to be, I think.
Nate, Matthew Morning's in the chat. He wanted to know, do you think a civil war is going to pop off, or do you think that's what they're gearing towards? Do you think they're gearing up, and James, whatever you think as well, like, do you guys think that they're trying to like push people towards a civil war or something like that?
I think they'll try, but they'll pull back. I don't think Americans have it in them at this point. You would think there would have been a civil war by now to take back the Constitution. Now, because the thing is, you can expose corruption, but when you take the survival instinct out of the public and they don't have it any longer, you can show them the truth all you want. They're not going to react to it. And so I don't see that happening. I just see us on the edge of chaos all the time. I see an economic collapse coming. Once you get past that point, anything can really happen, because people become really desperate. And but I think they'll still use the divide and conquer strategy at that point, and it'll be the haves and the have-nots and the Hunger Games at that point. So with an AI overlord, but so hopefully that doesn't happen. But we definitely have all the ingredients for that recipe right now, and it's being stirred by the government and their intelligence agencies.
Yeah, and I have one more question for James. Matt was another question from Matthew. He wanted to know: do you believe there might be positive or neutral reptilians?
Absolutely. We used to call them, at least some of them, messengers, where reptilian, in a typical example, reptilian would show up at someone's bedside at night, not emitting a fearful, off-putting vibe as some of the more negatively inclined, negatively energized ones tend to do. And of course, they can amp that up to really increase your anxiety or paralysis, whatever the case may be. But there are times when these messengers would show up, and they would appear to people, and they would sometimes just telepathically make a cryptic statement and then disappear, or say something that has some degree of meaning that is comprehensible to someone and then disappear. And I know of cases, well, let me just give two brief cases of many that I've heard, and these are from people that I knew and trusted, know and trust implicitly. The first story, I didn't really know the gal well, but I knew my friend was a close associate of hers. This was told to me by Sean Atlanty, the founder of the San Diego UFO Society, and I heard the girl herself, Leisha Davidson, one of the first MIlabs to go public in California, talk about this. Leisha was having problems with deep black elements of the Air Force that were coming around and occasionally beating her up and doing other things to her, right? To the point that a reptilian sentry showed up at her house. This is in Los Angeles, a suburb of Los Angeles somewhere. And this large 8-foot plus reptilian manifested in her home, and like a sentry was pacing back and forth in her living room, and it was essentially guarding her from any further depredations from the military. Like it was there as her protector, basically, right? And for a while, the military, understandably, left this gal alone because presumably that reptilian represented a faction of reptilians and or other beings that reptilian may be aligned with, that either was not in league with the military that was messing with this gal or was in opposition to it in some way. At any rate, the presence of that reptilian protecting that gal, Leisha Davidson, kept her safe from the depredations of the military for a while. And I knew another gal, I'll call her Sally. That's not a real name, but she was descended from the Austro-Hungarian dynasty, right? She was Austrian, and she grew up near Aspern-Essling, one of the first places Napoleon was actually defeated or set back in his campaigns. And she was of that reptilian bloodline. The main reptilian she was interacting with, she called him number one. He was the leader of this particular reptilian group. And this guy, I would consider him to be malevolent, and he was quite harsh to her, viewed her as his mate or one of his mates, which we've heard this again and again from some women that have reptilian sexual experiences, that some of these reptilians seem to regard these human females to be mates, to be their possessions, because the more malevolent reptilians, they have this concept of human ownership, which they've passed on to their hybrid minions, like the Hillary Clintons of the world, it's George Soros of the world, etc. Well, this number one reptilian was the leader of this group of reptilians. They were preparing a human and a reptilian body for him in Chicago, somewhere of all places, right? And for a long time, this reptilian was, for the most part, in non-corporeal form, but they were preparing both a human and a reptilian physical body for him, and he'd interact with and densify long enough to have intercourse with this woman. Anyway, the number two, the executive officer, if you will, the second in command of this reptilian, and I'm trying to remember the story correctly, but he was sympathetic to the gal, right? And he was in contact with other reptilians that formed kind of a dissident or a breakaway faction from the main reptilian group. And there was a third reptilian that was very protective of her and was working with her, protecting her from the depredations of the other more malevolent reptilians of that clan or that family or whatever. And long story short, that reptilian that was helping her, that was somewhat of a rebel, was found out by the other reptilians and either was subjected to draconian punishments or done away with entirely, right? And we've heard of that as well. So cycling back to Matthew, how you doing, Matthew? Thank you for the questions. Cycling back to his question, yes, and they come in various forms as messengers to give warnings, cryptic messages, or just to be a friendly, benign presence. Some are protectors, like in the case of Leisha Davidson, and sometimes, as the example I just gave, there could be a rebel faction within a larger grouping of reptilians that are not entirely in consonance with the overall agenda. And David Eckhart talks about that, where, and I've heard this from other sources, where in the reptilian underground bases he's been at, he's seen this kind of hierarchical caste system where the controlling reptilians control, enslave essentially, uh, not only other ET or subterranean civilizations, races, but other reptilian groups, right? That are weaker and couldn't defend themselves. They enslave them and they get them to work as part of this other grouping. So, yes, I don't perceive them as all. And some people have, castigated me for being 100% anti-reptilian. I want to qualify that. I'm only against the negative reptilians. I got no qualms at all against benevolent or friendly reptilians. And a point must be made also, since we're on the subject, and it harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, how they know who we are coming into the earthly plane. Oh, here's Robert again. Here's Nathan again, come to give us another ration in this timeline. Well, we have like a similar dynamic where some of us have had reptilian or Draco incarnations. We were what I call incarnational infiltrators. We're at an oversoul level, we decide to incarnate into these types of civilizations, cultures, species, and we're just like them. We're conquerors, we're enslavers, what have you. Sometimes that carries over into our earthly incarnations as well. But they still carry a modicum of respect for us, right? Like there's some people I know that they're protected by the white Draco. There's almost like a mafia aspect to it. Like you can't mess with this person. You can torture them. You can mess with them up to a point, right? But you can't go any further because they're in mafia terms. They're like a made person. You need higher authority. And I've known of cases where certain lower level reptilians were trying to do serious harm to individuals, but the white Draco stepped in and said, "Leave this one alone. You've done enough. F off," and they back off. So, and I think it comes down to, from a soul level incarnational perspective, and we see this sometimes with these friendly, seemingly friendly, benevolent beings that we interact with at times. Sometimes they don't perceive us as James, Robert, or Nathan. They see us as who we used to be when we were what we would call ETs in a past parallel incarnation. So they don't see, in our example, Nathan. They see the ETs that Nathan used to be, the extended ET family and alliances and clans or whatever the case may be that Nathan was a part of before. And so they hold a measure of respect for him from that perspective. They not only respect him, in his human incarnation, but they have a lot of respect for him as to who he used to be, right? And so we see that dynamic play out when certain aliens, certain reptilians try to take like undue liberties on somebody, and then other reptilians or other beings step in. And sometimes there's a conflict. I don't want to go too deep into it, but sometimes there's a conflict over different factions or different groups of ETs wanting to abduct somebody. And Misha Johnson tells a story, and she woke up, these two ET groups were arguing over, who was going to abduct her at that time, right? And she overheard them say, "Well, we abducted her first, so she belongs to us," So there's almost like you have to draw some measure of humor out of some of this. It's not all grim. Some of it, when you step back and look, it can be there's a cosmic joke to it. But anyway, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, it was.
They're actually pretty much like us when you think about it. They're under a very totalitarian, oppressive regime, and you can't judge any one individual because of what the government structure that controls them is involved in. Rob, do you remember when we did the interviews, the first couple with the Farsight remote viewers?
Yeah. Is Indy Salmon. Yeah.
Yeah, and Shantae, remember when I pointed out to Yemi, because I noticed that when they were doing the remote viewing, that she wasn't treated the same when in regard to interacting with reptilians. They had a type of affection for her. They were more open towards her, and she felt a connection with them. And what I felt intuitively from her is that she has that in her background. And if you remember, I told her, I said, you feel like maybe Royal Draco or something like that. And her face lit up because she knew what I was talking about, but doesn't talk about it publicly. But yeah, we've all got some kind of background somewhere else. And, they apparently have an affection for those who have been part of their race or part of a sister race. So it's no different than people. We're all really the same. We're just wearing skin costumes in this electromagnetic holographic experience.
Yeah, that's really
Look at the rough task that we've been given, because some of these ETs that are part of our extended ET family, compared to us, they're sitting atop a cloud playing harps, right? We're the ones that took on the mantle of having to incarnate into increasingly more oppressive systems every time we come back, knowing at an oversoul level that we're only going to have a fraction of our powers, that we're not going to be able to utilize and wield our powers the way we normally would, but yet somehow these different ETs in the military can engender within us, enhance, if you will, these already latent metaphysical powers we have within us when we're in their thrall or when we're working with them or for them, right? But when we're here on terra firma, at times our lives are all discombobulated, all these different interpersonal, financial issues, what have you. You got to deal with all this crap, right? To keep us at this low vibratory ebb, which keeps us in this frequency bandwidth, which is easier to control, right? So yes, I see what you mean exactly.
Yeah. Well, but this was an amazing show, guys. I gotta run some errands, even though it's like freezing here. But yeah, this was great. And does you guys want to tell people where they can find you? And thank you. This was awesome. We went almost 2 hours. Yeah, Nate, do you want to tell people first and any final words, and then James and yeah, thanks, guys. This was a really good show.
I'm still in limbo. I'll be back to work here in about a month. And at which point I'm going to get back into my social media project. So I'm going to be doing Project New Awakening and Planetary Consciousness Project. You can find me essentially if you go to the YouTube channel, the Planetary Consciousness Project. You can find me there. And my Rumble channel is kind of like hidden right now, so I'm not going to go into that. But that's all I've been doing. I've just been kind of existing and doing a few podcasts and things like that, and then trying to get myself together. But I do have something in store in the near future that I'm going to be working on. It's just a few weeks away. So, and if anybody needs to reach me, it's ncisek@verizon.net. NCISZ, like zebra, EK @verizon.net. If you need to email me and ask questions or get in touch with me for something important. But up until for now, that's it. So I'm just kind of like just floating around in, the background. So go ahead, James.
Yes, you can find me at thecosmicswitchboard.com. You can also find me on Facebook, on X, and also you can email me, thecosmicswitchboard@yahoo.com, if memory serves. So thank you once again, Robert, for getting me on your fine show. And also great seeing you again, Nathan. Robert, you do superlative work. I can't say enough about your tireless. You're really at the top of the heap. What you do,
Thanks.
I really mean.
I was going to say, it seemed like it was just yesterday that we were just in that hotel room, us three, and we were filming that. Like, it seems like it was like yesterday that we were at the Full Disclosure Now conference, and we were filming that, or we were doing that podcast in the hotel room. Now here we are, it's 6 months later, and things are just as crazy. And I don't know.
All you have to do is step outside, and you'll be able to tell there's a difference because it isn't 90 degrees anymore in tropical. It's cold.
The humidity was crazy over there.
Yeah.
I would step out of the hotel room. My glasses would fog up from the humidity. It was crazy. Yeah, anyhow, it was great seeing you guys again.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. And Nate, I hope you feel better. And